Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a big group today. I think probably because we've got a really interesting story. So I'm very excited to welcome Dan from Indiana University, who's going to be presenting. We're going to go through some things that are a little bit different this time around. So for those of you who have joined us for our higher education analytics webinars in the past, we actually want some interaction. We need some input from you, if you will. The topic for today's webinar is data virtualization. So if we don't mind going to the next slide, please. I'd actually like to do a quick poll and find out how many of you have even heard of data virtualization. Are you implementing it? Is this something you're investigating? Where are you on that spectrum? I'm going to give you, I don't know, 15 or 20 seconds to answer, and then we will look at this. I think, Alex, we can probably do this and share the results, because I think it's interesting for everybody to know where their peers are too, and to know that they're not alone. Great. So it looks like most people have heard of it. Some people are experts. I don't know if Dan voted multiple times or how that worked. And some people are in the camp of, hey, this is new, but let's check it out. It sounds pretty interesting. And I messed up. I actually wanted the slides to go this way, but we're going to go back to our one and only commercial slide. I promise there will not be a lot of slides about NewComp. A little bit about us. We have partnered today with our higher education analytics community and our vendor partners, Denodo, to help us bring to you an opportunity to speed up your time to implementation. And for me, that is the biggest key, the biggest reason we should be talking together today. About us, NewComp, we are an analytics and data organization. We do everything from your ERP, your source system forward. So if you think of that as, we can actually go to the next slide, Jen, sorry. If you think of that as everything from ETL, data virtualization, data lakes, we try not to do data swamps, but we can help you get out of one if you want. BI, data virtualization, visualization, financial planning, what if scenario modeling, everything from that to AI and machine learning, predictive advanced analytics, pardon me. So things like student churn, what is your dropout rate, what's your retention rate, why are people leaving, those types of things. And of course, the underpinnings of all of that is the data management component. That's the foundation the house is built on. So that's what NewComp does, and that's why we're here today. So we can go to the next slide, please, Jen. Your speakers today, myself, I'm Erica Dale. I'm a senior account manager. You can tell because I have gray hair, and I turned my camera on just for that corny joke. Jen McNaughton is going to give us the data virtualization 101, if you will. She's going to walk us through a lot of the advantages of Denodo and why I think people should care. Dan Young is the absolute star of the show. He's going to talk about his own personal journey at Indiana University and hopefully how he's been able to make his life a little bit easier as he moved forward through this. Just some logistics. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat on the GoToWebinar dialog box. I will be moderating those. For Dan's presentation, we are going to take questions at the end because I think we're going to have a lot of content to cover in a very short period of time. So as I mentioned, Jen's going to give us the Denodo overview and what is data virtualization. Dan is going to talk about his own experience and then questions. Thanks, Jen. So with that, I'll pass it over to you. Now, I think we have another poll question, right?
Yes, you're right. I think we have one more poll question to put up.
We do have one question here as well from the audience, and that is this being recorded? Yes, it's being recorded, and we will share that with you at the end. So to your point, if you're not comfortable with it being recorded, then feel free to drop it this time, and we will share a link with you at the end. So the poll question, just before we get started, is, do you have a data warehouse? And I had to put in a provocative one there at the end, so because I've heard it before. So we'll give you a few minutes to select your answer, and then we'll share it with the class so that we kind of have a baseline of where everybody's coming from. Great. So it looks like most of the votes are in, and happy to see that most people have a data warehouse. Some people don't, and some people, as I expected, we're real happy with the one that's in place. So these are, I think you're going to find some interesting ideas about how we can help you fix that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jen, and she can give you those interesting ideas.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. So what is data virtualization? I'm sure many of you are familiar with the mess of systems that don't talk to each other. Some may be in SAP, some in a SQL server here, some on the cloud over there. So it can be a little bit hard to reach. So data virtualization essentially allows you to connect real time to data in a way that makes it easy for a user application to access data. And it actually makes the data source look, act, and behave as if it were in one physical data store, but it's only bringing back the metadata of the source. So this eliminates, as you can imagine, terabytes of duplicate data since it remains in the original source without being staged. So in essence, it consolidates all of your disparate data sources into a single view. This takes the complexity out of that actual report writing, and it reduces the time to actually deploy reports because users are able to access this single virtual layer in real time at any point. So it's just a bit easier to understand if you're looking at this architecture diagram here. So in the red, the virtualization layer in the middle is sitting between all of your data sources and your data consumers. And it's acting as this abstraction layer so that you can build your logical business models here, and those can be consumed by the users. So whenever a user executes a query, that query is received by the virtual layer, and Denodo's optimizer engine evaluates the best way to execute that query. It then federates those queries to your underlying data sources, meaning it brings the data all together, and it retrieves it back in real time. So combines, integrates, it transforms the data into a format that you've actually defined in your semantic layer, and it returns the data to your end users. So this is a similar slide, but it actually just shows the virtual layer in a bit more detail. So you can see at the bottom here, some of the sources we're able to connect to, both on-prem and cloud sources, which can range from traditional relational databases like Oracle and SQL Server to other things like APIs, SaaS offerings, multidimensional sources, Hadoop, web sources. So it can connect to essentially anything. From these sources, we create these gray tables, which we call base views. These are just metadata representations of what's in the underlying sources. Now, the key is no matter the format of the data in the underlying sources, the representation in Denodo looks relational. So once you've created these base views, you can define any kind of combination or transformation on the data that you want, which is this blue layer, and these are called your derived views. So then your end users can consume that data via SQL or a REST API in your BI tool or Denodo's data catalog, for example, along with other methods. It can also act as a place to set up all of your security, which is based on roles and users in Denodo. And this can be integrated with your existing Active Directory server, so users only have to comply with one security model. And it can serve many different use cases. We've seen with Denodo clients creating a logical data warehouse for BI and analytics is quite popular to serve data for reporting. They may use it for data governance, so for compliance and auditing your data and understanding your overall lineage. We've also seen it used to expose data as a service through APIs. And it could be also used as an abstraction layer for your cloud data sources. So if you're in the process of migrating to the cloud and some of your data is still on premises, your users will see no difference in their view, and this can speed up the process of accessing that information. Big data is another use case where virtualization can act as a presentation layer and query acceleration. And then lastly, machine learning is another big one. So using Denodo to deliver data to your data scientists so they can access and find it more easily and not spend so much time on data prep and wrangling. So it's really just accelerating that first part of the machine learning process. Now, before we move it over to Dan, we have one last poll question for you all. And Alex will pull that up right now. Awesome. And the question is, are you experiencing data source proliferation? So the data may be coming from many different sources in the cloud, on premises, various spreadsheets. You may have hundreds or somewhere in between. Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we have quite a few folks who are experiencing a lot of different data sources. They can be a combination of structured and unstructured data, and dealing with how to make all of this information useful. So we'll talk about that more today. I'll hand it off to Dan now, and he will talk about his journey with Denodo.
All right, well, thank you. Give me just a moment to figure out what the heck I'm doing here to get some things put in front of you all.
You are an IT professional, Dan. It's all good.
That's professional is a pretty strong word. All right. Well, I'm hoping you can all see my screen. Is that correct? You ought to see a lot of words, big long title.
Yeah, we're good.
Including my job title, which you can just refer to me. I like to welcome you to my world headquarters, otherwise known as my basement. So thank you for taking your time today to come in perfect timing. My heater kicks on, so you can't hear me. I mean, you couldn't plan it any better. But thank you all for taking the time today to come and for the opportunity to speak a little bit about our experience at Indiana University and what we've been able to accomplish using Denodo as a tool for us reimagining really our data warehouse. So today I want to talk a little bit about the illogical data warehouse, or the illogical data warehouse. Maybe to a lot of you, this notion of federating your data and not moving it from the source or not moving it into a data warehouse probably can seem like an illogical solution to this large problem. But as we see from the polls, the proliferation of data sources and those sorts of situations, make it pretty clear that moving data from A to B, of course, involves time, it involves resource, it involves money, and that perhaps is maybe not always the ideal situation for us to arrive at answers and to make, I guess, analytics, if you will, that will help improve our decision making. So let me just hop right in with this little anecdote. So I'm not sure how many of you know what this is to take a look at it, but a few spring breaks ago, this is in my garage. This is a spring to my garage door, and if you've noticed, it had a little bit of a problem. So for those of you who may know, if your garage door springs aren't working, your garage door doesn't really go up and down. And if you hit the Google machine up, you'll find that, woe to you who tries to repair your own garage door spring, because, certain death will befall you. And I'm a bit of a DIY sort of guy. So, I found a few other sites that suggested, well, here's how you can approach the problem and here's where you can order springs. And I simply say this to sort of put into context how I've approached sort of my career with respect to data, is that, sometimes it's good to sort of step out of your comfort zone and to try something that may be new or a little bit different, and then to see where your results lead you. I've had a lot of success over the years in taking that approach, and I believe that really to be the same with the logical data warehouse and what we've done at IU. So I understand this could be a higher ed audience, so you all will appreciate this much more than a lot of times when I end up speaking to more of the commercial sector. So let me run through IU just to give you a brief overview. So IU, we have quite a few folks. You add them all up, it's around 120,000 system-wide with students, over 92,000, and then quite a few staff. We're spread throughout the state of Indiana. Our primary campuses are at IU Bloomington and in Indianapolis at IUPUI, and then we have other regional campuses for the students that we serve throughout the system. Overall, we are this new budget year, maybe a $4 billion operation. We have quite a bit of size to our capabilities. We are what's known as an R1 research institution, so we're part of the large consortium of large research institutions. So we have a large group of funding that comes from the government, as well as, of course, a large student body. Just some interesting facts about us, that you might like to know. 138 countries, at least one of graduated folks in 2020. And of course, every county in Indiana sent us at least one student in all 50 states. One of our current claim to fame is we have a giant supercomputer, which was actually debuted just a little over a year ago and has not been fully turned on yet. And that's because this is where I've been able to connect with my son. As you may know, supercomputing involves a lot of what are now known as GPUs. And so graphical processing units is that's the wave of the future, or the current, of how we achieve high performance computing. And my son's a gamer, and he's all about the GPU and how fast are the graphics. And when I had a discussion with him, about, well, we use those in the high performance computing world too. It was sort of an eye-opening experience. But you can see by all the brains there on the left that the graphics folks decided that they have a whole lot more brains, petaflop capabilities with Big Red 200. But it is just a sort of interesting data point as well. One thing that my procurement office requires that I say is that this is not an endorsement. While Oprah might tell you that everyone gets an endorsement, that's not the case for this particular presentation. What I'm going to try to do, though, is to represent to you that our experience with our products that we use to achieve our particular brand of analytics and how we're moving forward with that. So you will notice I talk fast and I talk a lot, and I've got about 63 slides in 40 minutes, so I'm trucking through them. I'll be happy to slow down a little bit and answer some questions at the end, but I do appreciate everyone and your willingness to listen. In 2009, we did a study with IBM that took a look at our data warehousing situation at IU, and they said such kind things as not in the most usable format, can't really perform analysis across our various functional areas, admired in decade-old reporting practices. I don't know if any of you have ever fallen into that boat. Maybe you are currently in that boat. Our data warehouse had its roots in the mainframe, and we liked it so much that we just took that design model, we picked it up, and we ported it to several different topologies along the way. And we did a stint with with some Sybase databases, and then we moved that into Oracle, and then we were running on IBM P-Series gear, and then as we virtualized, we moved into Linux and Oracle. But for the most part, we kept the primary design the same. Take the data from the source, have some operational data stores, dump it into the data warehouse, and there you go. You have your reporting environment. We found problems. Questions like, who really owns all this data? I can't imagine any of you have data silos, and I'm sure you all share data well between your various groups and your institutions. Where's your security? How do you manage access to that data? How do you manage your data naming? How do you understand that this system is called University ID, and this other system is called Employee ID, and this third system is called Person University ID, but it's truncated? How do you manage all of those sorts of different data elements? The study found that the decision makers at the university, in our case, that would be the deans of schools, the chairs of departments, people who are responsible for making sure that each school is able to move forward and have the information they need in their hands. Well, we're throwing too much data at them. A lot of different formats. Some people love Excel, some people love other tools. It's spread out all over the place. So the data was not making it to the decision makers for them, and certainly not in a format that they could easily consume and understand it, so they can then help guide the direction of their particular division. So here's a sort of a typical, but this was also our traditional data warehouse sort of setup. You'll notice we've got some data spread out here. We've got operational data sources and operational data stores on the left. We do some ETL, off of our ODSs. We keep data. We had data in cubes with SQL Server. Of course, if you use table extract, you might have some data shoved in there. And then, of course, you also, in this whole process, you end up with data inside your data warehouse. And every good data warehouse has at least 2 copies of the data, because one's just not quite enough. So you end up with a lot of data redundancy throughout this entire stack. But this is a fairly traditional, fairly typical way of looking at the data warehousing world, and we were part and parcel to it. And for that matter, we still are following many of these similar processes as it pertains to our legacy data warehouse. And the piece that I would like to draw a little delineation here is the data warehouse, at least in the terms of IU, was primarily used for what I would describe as operational reporting. So if you're in admissions and you want to see who applied, yesterday, you would go to the data warehouse to retrieve that information, and that would give you effectively your work for today, right? If it's your job to contact folks back, it becomes sort of an integral part of doing your day-to-day business. But what we were losing sight of was more the analytics piece of the world, trends and things that are happening sort of at a macro scale. And so the data warehouse in itself, although we've made several valiant attempts towards dimensional modeling and those sorts of things, we were never really tremendously successful at moving forward in this model with respect to analytics for decision makers. So challenges, of course, in a diagram like this is that you have your business logic spread out in multiple places. It could be in your reporting tier, it could be in your ETL tier, and how do you begin to make sense of that and make sure that when you do summaries or totals, that things are adding up across divisions and reports. And then another challenge, of course, is the cycle time. Like so many folks have experienced, that by the time it wasn't uncommon, for you to start, say, let's gather requirements for 6 months, and then go back and do the development for 6 months of moving it through this stack of first getting the data and then writing the ETL and all of the various pieces and components in that. By the time you return the product to the end user, it's nice that you did it, but they don't need it anymore because it took your delivery time was impacted. So, and then of course, change in this stack is difficult. If you change something on this diagram far to the left, that impact has to travel all the way through to the right, and it slows down. If you think about lineage and those sorts of things. So that's the problem in a nutshell. We knew that we needed to make some improvement. So what did the solution look like, and where did we start? Well, so fortunately, our former CIO also did his doctorate work in data warehousing. And so he was well-versed in a particular topic. And so he established what we call the Decision Support Initiative. And overall, this goal was to improve decision-making at all levels of the university. It's not so much about technology, although technology plays an important part, but it's really about listening to and understanding the data that decision makers need, and then working back through that to help improve how we are exposing and creating and making data available to those who need it in a way that they can understand it. We began this in February of 2015. And so we've been at this now for about 6 years, this particular product, just to sort of set the timeline of where we are. And we continue today to revise and add, and we'll talk a little more about our output here a little bit later on. One thing that, as I mentioned, the Decision Support Initiative, it's going to be a people and organizational change, right? Who can have access to the data? We're going to try to answer those sort of questions. Who has authority over the data? Who owns it? All of those sorts of things. As I mentioned, it's a data and technology approach. It is data. We want to be more transparent than we certainly are, and we want to help break down some of the silos that have been created over time. The focus here still remains laser on how do we improve decision outcomes. So what is it that impacts our decision making, and what analytics help to improve people's deans and chairs and their ability to understand what's happening inside of the university. So the org chart roughly looks a little bit like this. This is a bit dated, but I think a couple of things that I do want to pull out are really twofold. First, part of our charter was to do Agile BI, and that would have been a great poll question. How many of you do Agile BI? How many of you know what Agile BI is? Is there such a thing as Agile BI? Our development shop, our university development shop, made a strong shift to Agile development beginning in about 2015. And so as part of that, we were part and parcel to it. But I would argue that Agile BI is a little different than traditional Agile development. So we established a team, and we have been refining that process now for the last 5 or 6 years in terms of what it means to really work agilely within business intelligence and analytics, and how do we continue to improve that. The other piece that was really important as part of the Decision Support Initiative was this requirement that the business, if you will, provided us product owners in Agile speak, so that we have dedicated people within each business unit for the work that we are doing, so that they can help us walk through the various business cases, the various rules. They have subject matter expertise in a particular area to help us arrive at products that actually do impact decision making, and that we're spending our time well. And so that's been a boon for us. A primary product owner has worked at the university for a number of years, and she has spanned many different areas, and so it's in those many and is well networked, and so it makes a huge difference for us to be able to get answers to our questions in terms of how process and procedure works and how we can then turn that into actionable insight. So at the end of that decision support sort of charter, if you will, or that charge for us to move forward, as I mentioned, success is not going to be measured by deliverables, but by better decisions made. And that's kind of mind-blowing when you begin to think about it, because you begin to ask questions like, well, how in the world do I measure better decisions, let alone actual IT product? But we'll get into that, how we have attempted to do that just in just a moment. So we know the problem. We know the problem is, the data warehouse does not necessarily support the needs of decision makers at the university. We know the solution. The solution is going to be this thing called the Decision Support Initiative, which is this multi-year project to go out and to help improve decision making at the university. So we have strong executive support, to accomplish the goal. And so the question now becomes, okay, how? How are we going to do it? And so there were some pre-existing conditions in our environment, which I think made some of our decisions easier. We're a Tableau heavy shop, so we've got a little Tableau everywhere, and so Tableau was going to be the visualization tool of choice. There wasn't much discussion about that, and at the time, Tableau was for sure certainly the market leader, as they continue to be very strong in that space, and so there wasn't much thought about what's the tool when it comes to the actual visualization end. We have relatively strong university data management, stewardship, and security policies. And so we wanted to make sure that any work that we would do would work within the bounds of those policies and procedures. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, we needed to deliver the project using Agile. So I put my thinking cap on, and I said, so what are the things that, in my role as chief data architect, by the way, and I said, so wouldn't it be great if, as I looked at what we would like to do, and I said, wouldn't it be great if we could do something like an object relational modeler does, where we could separate the data from that is sourced to a report from the data itself. So I'm sure that none of you never, I'm sure that new vendors never come into your ecosystem. I'm sure that you never have trade one vendor for another, or you roll out new systems for some, replace legacy systems. That all your reporting interfaces just remain constant and steady. Of course, I'm kidding. But in this type of model, is there a way that we could separate the, if you will, or abstract is probably the better word, that we could abstract the reporting data model from the data itself? And could we actually do that with something in Agile? Could we then also build on our data governance approach and develop a discipline around trying to make sure we have well-curated metadata and something that's realistic? And what I mean by that is, no one really likes to write definitions, and different institutions have different levels of data governance and people dedicated to the project. Is there a way that we could do this, adhere to policy, and to do it, in a realistic level of granularity? The third piece, so if we have all this data, can we find a way for users to actually see what's been created so they can easily get to it and reuse it? Makes a whole lot more sense if something's been built to reuse it than it is to build it again, but half the time just finding things are a challenge. Then ultimately, could we arrive sort of at a self-service, self-service nirvana, using common data sets as much as possible, but have that all come under the umbrella of this reporting system, and to shield the end user from some of the making of the sausage, if you will, and weaving together these various systems in the back end. So these were sort of the tenets that I thought through and said, this would be great if something like this existed. But lo and behold, I didn't have an answer for that particular those particular sets of requirements. So sort of restating some of these various requirements, we were interested in data blending and federation, data security and role-based access. Our legacy data warehouse had a homegrown role-based access solution, which generates all kinds of performance overhead. And so is there a better way that would integrate in our particular environment? Is there something that will support data governance, do data abstraction, and help us as we were inventing, if you will, for our purposes, what the heck even is Agile business intelligence? So did some more thinking, me and the cat, and lo and behold, I came upon this notion of data virtualization. I have to admit, I'm a little ashamed. I've been working in the data industry for, well, I don't know, 15, 17, 18 years, something like that. I have to go back and do the math. A mathematician, I'm not. Go back and look at it, but I'd never stumbled on this idea of data virtualization. So as I was reading through that and thinking about our requirements, here's what data virtualization really could bring to the table, right? It could do many of the things that we wanted to. We could get that abstraction. We could, unify our data governance. Its whole goal in life is, at least one of the goals in life, primary use cases, as would be for Agile data development, right? And I was introduced to this notion of a logical data warehouse. So we went through the process of looking at different data virtualization vendors. And if you've ever had to do that within higher ed or anywhere, the flow chart for that actually looks something like this. This is not our real procurement flow chart, by the way, but you do an RFP and you do the analysis, and at the end, we actually did award the contract. And as you can imagine, and why they're here is we selected Denodo as our virtualization vendor. So woohoo, step one, we've got this solution called data virtualization, and we're really happy with that. We signed that contract in June, the end of June in 2015, and then we spent about 6 months working with the tool, getting it ready. We put our first production pieces into play early in, I believe it was January of 2016. So this is similar to a slide that you saw earlier. Your data sources there are on the bottom, spread across various different platforms and topologies. You have Denodo in the middle of the data virtualization, and then serving up these abstract or federated views to different places, to your BI stack, to Excel, just really a lot of different types of connectivity. And I could talk at length about what we've been able to accomplish with this type of flexibility within our environment. So I talked about that first requirement of that abstract data layer, much like an object relational modeler. Think back to that first slide. The next requirement then was to talk about metadata. And how do we capture this metadata in a way that meets university policy? How can we do this at a grassroots level? We're a large institution. We are spread out across the state. We have different reporting divisions. We have an Office of Institutional Reporting. We have several large pockets of strong groups of people who do reporting, and they don't necessarily share well across the groups. They have different charters. They're looking at different things. But could we build a system that we could use within my team? And then is this something that we can replicate and bring others into the fold so that we then move forward with an improved data governance situation? So that was something we were looking to try to do. We need a solution that's simple, because you can spend a lot of money on a master data management tool. You can spend a lot of money on data governance. But for us, we needed to do the basics well and to start at the beginning. And we really wanted this to be something that we would expose as a service, so that we aren't the only people who are involved, but it maybe can gain some momentum and move across the university. So more thinking, you'll notice I do a lot of that. And we came across a tool called datacookbook.com, or I should say Data Cookbook, and just for short. And it is a higher ed specific data glossary. So you have a business glossary, a report library, as well as, which I will refer to as specifications. So a specification is a description of your report. And then within your reports, you have different terms, definitions, those sorts of things, including the technical details. And then a community throughout higher ed of people who are actually using this particular tool. One thing that stood out to us is the ability to integrate, interface with Data Cookbook so that we could make more pleasing sort of reporting interfaces to actually look at this metadata and pull these things through. So to give you an idea, here's a definition, what we would call, class sections taught. And so my team will first take a pass at these definitions as we create our data artifacts. We will then forward those on to the appropriate business functional areas. They will either, they will comment on that and edit the definitions as necessary. Ultimately, those flow back to my team and they are approved for publication as we are working through various visualizations and work that we create. But what you're seeing here really is the administrative interface of the tool. What we actually do then is we wrap it up in a prettier format, and then we just link out from, say, the visualization. So, we have a help button on all of our visits, and you click on it, it will take you to this particular section of definition and reporting specifications to help you just be, or I describe it as, we're not going to tell you every little thing the visualization does, but what we want to do is help orient you to the thing that you're looking at and what's the story that we're trying to tell. So we've covered two of those four requirements. We've got that we've got data virtualization standing in to help us create the logical data warehouse and the abstraction layer and connecting us to all kinds of data under the sun. We've got a metadata solution, which is, in our case, happens to be higher ed specific, which is nice. So they know terms like iPads. I don't know if necessarily in Canada if you have a similar governmental organization, but we certainly do here, where all institutions must report to the federal government certain metrics. So a lot of these various terms and things, in some cases already defined, you can borrow from our friends at other schools. And so now we move on to that third requirement was, can we actually easily search? Can we find these reports we create? In our particular situation, especially in our legacy data warehouse, across time, people have, and I would quantify this in the industry in terms of a data portal, I guess, maybe, or a search portal of sorts. In a legacy environment, across time, people have written thousands and thousands of reports, and it can be really hard to find anything that you might be looking for. How do you find a report on student performance or credit hours, or even how many people go to the university? And so we were looking for, within our sort of architecture, a way of improving that. We wanted to be able to make it simple to search. Welcome. We now have the internet and Google and all these magical tools available to us to help provide search capability. Couldn't we do something similar in the space of finding reports that we create or that others create and that they want to make available as well? And then the last piece of that, we would like to have some level of badging on our reports, indicate how much do we trust them. And it's going back to that poll question, talking a little bit about trust. Sometimes you just have a quick and dirty report, right? The boss asks for how many of these widgets do we make? And you go out and you just run it right through, and the answer is 27. Have you really done QA on that data? Probably not. Do you need to? Probably not. How much should someone else trust that data? That's where the badging comes into place. It's really a statement of how authoritative is this data and how much QA has been done to ensure that it is accurate. So these are all three of these tenets or pieces that we're very interested in that third requirement. This required some thinking with some help. Not just me, but we arrived at something we call bs.iu.edu, which is a search portal technology. Some of you may have heard of OneCampus. It is a search portal that IU built and created and then licensed to OneCampus, but it's a multi-tenant solution. So we were able to really very quickly, this was real true technically our first deliverable. It's a multi-tenant topical search engine. And then once you click on it, it will take you by a URL to the report or the resource that you're looking at. That could be a PDF, that could be a Tableau URL, that could be some other web link, that could be any Word document, anything that you can get to with the URL could sit inside our reporting search portal if you would like. And of course, we can logically group reports. If you want to look at everything by a particular division or group, or they show me all the reports you have about a student, you can put all these together, and additionally you can badge them for authority. So here's an example. In that top window, you would type in AM360, which happens to be the friendly name of one of our decision support initiative projects. And you see here are all of the reports that we've created for this particular project. And if you were to click on this, you can't, because obviously we're in PowerPoint, but it would then direct you to the URL of where these reports live, and then you could see that as well. So features of the tool, right? You see the badge. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. So I talked through these things before I actually show you, but you'll see there's the badge, shows up right there. And so as we go through, then you know, the various levels of badging are assigned as created, and we walk through that process. These can be favorited, they can be rated, I should say, they can be ranked, how much people like them. You see the star ratings there, and there's additional information available behind this as well. But for the most part, you can just think of this as a URL, searchable URL, you know, redirection keyword type of service, which has gone really, really well for us. The fourth requirement then, all right, the fourth requirement is self-service. How do we get to this nirvana of having self-service? Is there such a thing as a simple query tool, right, that we can access existing data and extracts? If we have all this well-documented data that we have metadata for, how do we pull that, make that available? How do we do role-level security, right, of this data? We just can't let everyone in, but we also should be so cumbersome that it takes days to weeks to grant access. And we really want it to integrate with all of our existing metadata so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel and retype things. So this, you know, this one we've had to think about for a while. It's taken some time. And what I'd like to say is we're done, but we're not quite there yet. Even after 5 or 6 years, our final solution that we believe is we're still really working on it. Denodo delivers a tool called the data catalog, and it's an extension of the Denodo tool itself. And we believe that we work really closely with them, and we believe that this is going to help us, you know, fulfill this self-service gap. So we've got Denodo. We have these abstract logical data sets that we've created. They're well documented. They're well curated. Here is your view of a student. Here is your view of your financials. Here is the view of, you know, classes or terms or whatever your situation is. Sort of the understandable version of this as it comes from your various systems upstream at the sources. That you then take that information and expose it as a data set in self-service, right? And you could hook Tableau to it. You can just query it itself, just making it, making your data available to the consumers. Democratization, to use a buzz phrase of data, what we're trying to really accomplish here. So where are we in that life cycle? We're still working very, very closely with Denodo on this, and we had opportunity to provide a lot of feedback there. And we expect that we're going to have the final release of the version we would like to widely deploy in 2021. I'll just give you a quick, brief show of this. Again, this is that search portal that I was showing you earlier. We can also not just search for reports, we can search for data sets. So if you type in student term plans at the top in that bar, we'll return to you a link that says, oh, here's the data set for student terms, plans, and responsibility centers. And so you go to the self-service tool, you sign in, and we will show you this view. So here's a curated view of the data. All of the metadata you will see throughout this is data that is stored in Data Cookbook, that product we talked about in the second tenet. So we're not recreating it. We're actually pulling that data out of Data Cookbook to describe this view and these attributes and putting it into Denodo so that we're not, we've integrated. It's essentially so that we only write the definition once, and then we're getting a lot of reuse of it throughout the stack. This is a sample of the query interface that's possible with Denodo. You sort of can drag and drop. So if you're an end user and you just want to simply discover some data and look around, you have access to it. You can write a real simple query. Especially if you're not inclined towards SQL, you can do drag and drop. And also then you can see the lineage of that data as it happens to move through. This one's not very interesting, but I just simply want to demonstrate that lineage is part of that tool. So we have those 4 tenets, and those 4 tenets then sort of manifest themselves in this final diagram where, oh, did I drop? Sorry, I see myself now. I don't see my presentation. Apologize for that. There we go. really in this final diagram, where you will see that on the left-hand side, these are various persistent data storage, data sources. It moves through Denodo, what we call the Agile Data Delivery tier. Then we will send it to our visualization tier, depending on solutions, right? Could be Tableau, could be reporting services, could be Excel. Squirrel SQL is another favorite of connecting to Denodo to actually retrieve those results. We also use their API for serving up RESTful data services, and that's a whole other conversation, probably for a different time. And ultimately, the front end, the front door is that ds.iu.eu, which I mentioned. People come to it, they click on that. Between that and the self-service tool, then they can do data discovery, which leads them to ultimately then to our data. I would like to take just a quick moment to talk about COVID, because that has, not that it hasn't occupied all of our lives for the last nearly, I guess, 10 months now, maybe more. But the university needed to develop a response, if you will. We call it our COVID response team, and how we were going to manage to restart operations at the university as we came into the fall of this year. So beginning in late May or so, I began working on the eye chart to your right. This is just and this is not, by the way, complete, but this just represents many of the different integrations and pieces of the puzzle that we have brought to bear to try to help the university move through. This describes our various testing systems that are involved. Our CRM is mixed in here for contact tracing, just a whole host of things. And the reason I'm sharing this is you won't find Denodo on this chart per se, except it's never called out. But you notice all the arrows and things that are pointing back and forth between A and Z and whatever the case might be. In the bulk majority of all of these cases, Denodo is used for these integrations. It has been very swift for us to take data from, say, a vendor, testing data from a vendor, and pass it along into our CRM, so that we are able to understand and track positive cases. So I don't, obviously, this is a whole presentation into itself. What I really wanted to point out is, while we began in 2015 with this idea of creating this logical data warehouse, Denodo has evolved at IU as a tool organically, where it has become something that is used by many departments for systems integration across a very wide number of data sources. And it's really been instrumental in our flexibility for speed of delivery for something like what you're seeing with our COVID response. So with that, I'll quickly jump into, and I'll try to blow through these as fast as I can. We can certainly talk about them more, but challenges that we faced on this journey. And so these challenges required a lot of help and a lot of thought from others to work through and to overcome. So as I mentioned at the outset, what is Agile BI and what did it mean for us? We read a lot. I have an Agile coach on my team. We did training, but Agile BI is a little different, I think, for developers in this space than it is for traditional folks. It doesn't. Sure, if you create a nice pie chart, not that you should ever create a pie chart, if you create a nice pie chart and put it in the bottom corner of your report screen, that's great. Maybe you've done an iteration, but the end users, they don't want that picture, right? They want the whole picture. They want to make decisions. They want to see everything. And so how do you strike that appropriate balance between iterative style requirements, which are supposed to be succinct and deliverable, and balance that against the need for a more complete picture and vision? And so we've tried various models of doing BI and Scrum and Kanban, and what I think we really found is that it's in itself running the shop. The business process around doing Agile BI for us has just had to evolve and go through its own set of iterations over time as well. How do we use JIRA? How do we gather requirements? How do we march through the development cycle in such a way so that we can deliver more frequently than every 6 months with a sprint? But perhaps a 2-week development sprint, which is sort of typical, is too short for BI. Currently, we're in about a 4-week development sprint where we try to standardize, set our goals, and accomplish those in that sort of cycle. So Agile BI for itself is just, in terms of learning how to do it, has been just as agile amongst the management of the team as it has been the actual development execution. So that was Agile BI was a challenge. That grassroots data governance notion that I talked about earlier, that too was something that has been a challenge. We don't have an organizational mandate to go out and do this, so we have to sell it. So we build as much as we can around the process, and when people come to us and they ask about, well, how do you do metadata, we really try to bring them into the fold, and we say, well, here's our standards, here's our naming conventions. You're welcome to take them, and we would love to have you partner with us. And so across the university, it's been a challenge to move that forward. I've not given up, but I also know that it's not moving as quickly as I would certainly like to see across all university. One thing we learned in our process that we didn't necessarily plan for well was the impact of quality assurance. So our initial products didn't have as high a quality as was desired, and so we had to develop a much more rigorous QA process. And as many developers will tell you, QA is not necessarily something that is exciting to do, and honestly, it probably consumes the better part of 60 to 65% of our entire development cycle. So we spend probably less time doing true development than we do actually making sure that our work is correct. But what do we get at the end of that? We get good product. We get product that people trust, things that we can defend, and that we can go back to the end users who maybe are accustomed to use their own reports, and we can convince them that our work from a central IT perspective is useful and can help them. Things that we're continuing to look at is how do we do a better job at automating those things? How do we work towards continuous integration? And that too is a continual process of refinement and looking at the ways that we work. Something I alluded to earlier when we began this, right? We've got to measure things based on decisions and how many improved decisions are we able to make. So how do you measure that, right? How do we even know if people are using our product and who is using our product and what do they use it for? We were really fortunate in that we had a doctoral student who came alongside us because he was doing his work in decision support, his thesis, and we were really, really fortunate. He came alongside our team and he went out and did an assessment. And he went and talked to the end users, and he collected data on who was using our products and what were the summaries and the findings and how could we improve it and where would it be more useful or less useful. And so it was a very eye-opening experience to begin to see that it's not necessarily deans of schools who use the product. It may be their assistants at the request of the deans. And so that might begin to change your perspective of what you're trying to visualize and how you want the solution to work. So very fortunate to have done that. I would love for an opportunity to get to renew this study, if you will. We were sort of our own guinea pigs with respect to the study and take a look at how we can further our product even better. And then one of the last things is, how do you determine reasonable requirements in scope? I don't know how many times I ask myself, is Agile BI just waterfall and agile floating? Because it would seem like we would always have a scope creep. And I think that's just the nature of the job. So it's taken a lot of conversation between myself and the team and our product owners to try to get a really good sense of how much we can chew, how large of a bite should we take in any one particular sprint, and what do we need to do to keep up a steady cadence of delivery. And so I think that's really an interesting challenge as well within the space. So the deliverables, we have sets of reports that we have developed across time for our various constituents based upon different business needs. And in particular, we've created a couple of data sets which were brand new to the university. One around, say, instructional effort and the cost of teaching a credit hour is something that is certainly new to us and trying to arrive at. But that was a labor of love to get to, because there's no true source for that data. But we've created, using different data sources, a process by which we can measure that is one large achievement, I think. And we are better positioned, for many of the things that we are looking for our decision makers to have in their hands in the future. So just to leave you with a couple of quotes, because no good presentation goes without quotes. One department chair says, that they had no visibility on the student side for their courses. and now we give them the historical perspective of what's going on within their particular division. So those are really, really strong words. And then, as I mentioned, from our previous CIO, who has since retired from IT and just going back to shouldn't say just, but he's going back to full-time teaching at the university. But one of the things he said this was the most transformative thing we've done to turn all that data to help make us better decisions. So really proud of the work of my team and the group to get us there. And I know there's a long ways to go, but it is certainly something that we are really interested in doing. So with that, I hope I'm not too long. I left a whopping 3 minutes for questions. If you would like to contact me, here's this information right here in front of you. I'm welcome and happy to answer questions. I can hang around long, whatever you would like to do. I'll just leave that up and I'll stop talking and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Dan. That was entertaining and informative. Really fantastic presentation. We do have one question that came in, and I have a question as well for you. So for the question that came in, again, for questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box for the GoToWebinar utility. The question is, for data warehouse data, this all makes sense. Have you also thought about operational data like logs, research data for these tools?
Right. So Denodo certainly does support that. We have, in some limited cases, done that within sort of that ecosystem now. As I mentioned, it's grown organically, right? And so I don't begin to know every use case that happens inside of the Denodo environment. I do know there is some log introspection that does happen, and I actually expect that to grow. As I mentioned, like I'm sure many people, we're switching vendors with regards to a particular log solution, and I think that Denodo will have a play in there for sure. Another example that's similar, not quite the same, but similar, our ticketing system will be moving from one platform we've used for years and years into another platform, and we have stored a lot of text out there in those tickets, and there's a lot to be mined. And it's our intention that Denodo is going to be the front door for that text and going through that to help keep it forever, or at least as long as we need it as we migrate into that new ticketing system. So certainly something it can do. And it just depends on your individual use case. I do know there are teams who are using it for operational in nature. In our case, our primary use case anyway is that logical data warehouse. So that's where we use it.
Perfect. Thanks, Ken. So the next question that came in is actually similar to the one I had. How did you demonstrate ROI in this? Because I know, traditional BI and data warehouse projects, it's very hard to do that. And we all really have to justify our capital expenses. So how did you manage to determine some sort of ROI?
So I guess we were fortunate in that we were afforded a budget to move forward with this. So it was a strategic project that came out of the university. And how it was initially cast is that there was a budget that was allocated, and it was predicated on a traditional model. So go out and buy a large reporting suite from a vendor, bring it in, install it, get it up to speed, and they had a timeline associated with that. They figured, I believe it was about 27 months, I believe, is where we thought the cash would run out from that initial outlay. But once we got into the details of moving forward with the project, and we looked at costs and expenses and those sorts of things, by using Denodo, we actually avoided a lot of that type of cost up front. And so we stretched that budget from 27 months to, I believe it was well over 60 months. I'd have to go back and pull up the actual number. So we don't have a hard ROI calculation, but from the perspective of what we anticipated the spend to be versus what we actually have been able to do, and to make that existing budget stretch across time, we feel like we've had great success in that. And that comes down to a couple of things. First, I think it comes down to the tool cost. There are places in the stack. So Denodo, as for example, out of box, comes with about, I won't say every connector under the sun, but they connect to an awful lot of different sources and types. some vendors charge you every time you want to connect to something new, right? So there's inherent cost savings in something like that. The time to delivery is really, I think, shortened is probably the right way to do it. Denodo is not an ETL tool, and they won't claim to be, but they continue to move. There are ways to do ETL sorts of things in Denodo. And I say all that because you might quickly prototype from, source to target and essentially define your contract, if you will, or your endpoint, where your reporting is going to hook to. Perhaps, for purposes of beginning development and completing that initial passive development with your BI tool or Excel or whatever you're connecting to Denodo, could be very rapid, right? So you can get immediate feedback with your end users and start to work through that. Once you have that solid model, then maybe you want to go back and tweak it a little bit. Perhaps you do need ETL in that stack of work, but it's going to trim your timeline. And so you're going to spend a little less time, I believe, really with some of that heavier development work until you're really sure you have a product that people want to use, and you can curate that data in such a way. So yeah, ROI is really tough to measure overall, but in our particular case, I think we've just seen, sort of happy, unexpected savings throughout the cycle as we're looking at those sorts of things. Recognizing that we are a large university, but and not all schools have some of the resources that we do. But we also at IU tend to run very efficiently from what we've understood by looking relative to our peers.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes sense. Like that soft cost has to be factored in, right? So if we can bring more systems online, fail fast, as we say when we're helping our customers, we want to fail fast because we don't want to go through a big expensive ETL process to find out that the data is not particularly useful. So I think that your points are really salient in terms of how to prove that ROI and really how to justify looking at a slightly different architecture from what we might be sort of preconditioned for, if that makes sense. Dan, with that, thank you so much. I'm going to close it off because we're a little bit after the hour, and it looks like you got another meeting to run to. So I do want to thank you very profusely for sharing your story. It was entertaining, engaging, and truly informative for me, at least, and I'm sure for others on the line. Please feel free to send your feedback to us here at NewComp if you want to see more presentations like this, other topics. Don't hesitate to shout them out. We're here to help, and inform and educate is our MO. So with that, I'll wish you all a very great day. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you.